Welcome to July's issue at hand. I'm Rusty Russell. I'm Executive Director of the Merrimack River Watershed Council, and it's great to be here today with my two distinguished guests, Lydia Sisson, who is co-director of Mill City Grows, the well-known and extremely effective organic and food justice organization in Lowell, and also Jay Mason, who is an architect and a planner who is also chair of the city's Sustainability Committee, appointed by the city manager. Jay, Lydia, it's great to have you here today to talk about green infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What is green infrastructure? It's something that insiders know a lot about, and unfortunately a lot of people probably haven't heard of. They've seen it, but maybe didn't even realize they were looking at it.
I think that's true. There's definitely a gap between the terminology and people that are very involved in building green infrastructure and then making sure that people understand what it is in real life.
I mean, even starting with the word infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
That is kind of a technical planner's word that I'm very comfortable with, but I'm not so sure that the general public really gets, what is the idea. And I think for me, infrastructure is the foundation that we build our systems upon. Our civic systems, the buildings, the utilities, the transportation systems all have to have some type of organization. And when you look at it from a sustainability standpoint or a green standpoint, I think the way that we look at those systems is changing now because we are, I like to think, a little more enlightened about how do we do this moving forward in a more sustainable way. And so for me, looking at green infrastructure just means looking at building our systems and planning for those systems in a more thoughtful, deliberate way, taking into consideration the future.
Well, infrastructure is like the sustainability. I was once at a planners conference where all the planners voted to ban the word sustainability for the following year. And I was going to say, well, why don't we repeat infrastructure 4 or 5 times and we'll put everyone to sleep.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? Because it's really delicious when we get down to it. We're talking about green infrastructure that affects water. Tell us about
Sure.
the ideas behind it, the exciting ideas.
Well, I know for me, learning about the river, and when you and I got together early this year, we realized that there's a huge pollution issue with the Merrimack River. And so looking at the health of the river and what infrastructure does around the river in terms of taking trees down and opening fields where development occurs has a huge implication on that health and has rendered the river, number 4 in terms of the endangered or critical list for the National Park Service. They're worried about all the non-point source pollution flows that are going in and polluting the river.
And when you talk about non-point source pollution, what exactly is that? That sounds like a technical term to me.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, with infrastructure, we think about it in a way, especially around the food system. So infrastructure to us is really also about, as you're saying, the way people eat, where they get their food, how they're walking to places, driving to places. So we sometimes think about it a little bit more on as if we were a neighborhood resident, thinking, how is your neighborhood set up? And so I am not as
very different.
It's a really different way to approach it. So when we look at infrastructure within our gardens, our farms, we're looking at a system within a neighborhood a lot of the time. So not as much on the broader, big scale, but how those smaller local pieces fit into an entire the architecture of larger infrastructure.
Well, and it sounds like you're talking more about the people part, whereas it's easier as a planner to think more about things as systems, right? There, you don't have to take personalities into account.
Right. Well, now that Amazon has bought Whole Foods, God knows where our infrastructure is headed, probably all online.
Yeah.
But this is real world. It involves water. I mean, let me start with a general question, and certainly this is very of concern to Merrimack River Watershed Council, but it is to you as well. Is the Merrimack River clean? And what, if it isn't, what should we be doing about it?
Well, I mean, I'll leave a little bit up to you, but I mean, I think that we have to think about the way people and our infrastructure is interacting with the Merrimack, and that's kind of where finding, like you said, those source points for pollution, but also source points where people want to interact with the river. How are we ensuring that those places are accessible and safe for our community. And so I think about how much the river is used by people and making sure that those points are safe. And also, I mean, we all drink water from the Merrimack.
We do?
Yeah.
Yes, there's something like, isn't it 600,000 people that get their water from
Yeah.
the Merrimack River?
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
dependent folks that rely on the health of the river.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So-
a pretty shocking statistic.
Yeah, so there are a lot of, so, and I think also we have to think about it along the entire path. I mean, Lowell is one component of the river's health, you know? It's got a long way to go, that river.
So from the Sustainability Council standpoint, we've worked with the Clean River Project, Rocky Morrison up and those folks in Methuen, but also have done what we can to facilitate meetings between what they're doing and what you're doing at the Clean River Project, at the Merrimack River Watershed Council, to deal with those things, taking the science on the academic side with what you're doing at UMass and actually connecting with the boots on the street or the folks in the river that are removing something like 70 cars over the past 10 years. I mean, a lot of stuff has come out of the river.
Yeah, boots on in the river.
Yeah.
In fact,
That's right.
River
Right.
boots.
Right.
Well, and that brings us to, you mentioned UMass, and Lydia and company, Mill City Grows,
That's
has
right.
this incredible project planned involving an organic greenhouse, but much more, including, we hope, an example
Yeah.
of what sort of is a core idea of green infrastructure, rain garden.
Right.
Tell us a little about what you have
Yeah,
planned.
and again, this isn't Mill City Grow's expertise, but part of working with the university is we have this big greenhouse, 30 by 60, and that's a roof. So that's where, water is going to be starting on this roof and just flowing down. And instead of just letting it go into runoff, we're working to plan a rain garden where the runoff would actually be captured in this garden, used to water plants, and also purified to make sure that it's safe to go and flow into either groundwater or the river. And I think you've got a lot of experience with rain gardens as well. I think thinking about how humans and everything we do, including agriculture, how it disturbs soil, whether you're putting asphalt or concrete down or you're putting a building, like what is that doing to the capacity of the earth to actually absorb water? And,
Sure.
and that's where the rain gardens are really, really intriguing modes of kind of...
Because they take that
Yeah.
issue of treatment,
Yep.
or filtration, which needs to happen, and they do it as nature would have done
Right.
it if it
Right.
were up to nature. So it's
Right.
fantastic that we've learned that we can actually go back to earlier, more primitive or natural practices and determine or achieve the filtration that we need naturally.
So in other words, what you're saying is, I'm just sitting here and saying, what's wrong with runoff? I like running. Isn't runoff the same? It's good and healthy, but it sounds like it isn't.
Well, we have a lot of
Right.
cars,
Yeah.
and we have a lot of other environmental sources of pollution that
Yep.
collect on the surface of our ground. And when that surface is sheeted into a water flow, you're going to have the transmission of those pollutants into wherever that water goes. So if you have that runoff that comes off of the parking lot in your nearby shopping center, it's going to have a fair amount of inorganic materials in it that need to be filtered.
Oh, well, so let's cut to the chase. So, rain, runoff, dog poop, the river, your tap. We might
Yeah.
be concerned about that. So,
I also think, we, and especially some neighborhoods in this city, have issues with flooding and lots of other things where we have to think about ways to mitigate that, and how are we, as we're building, and again, we're a city, so we're taking away space for water to be absorbed. Like, what are the ways that we are helping that water get to places where they're not going to be causing flooding in people's homes and not causing potentially damaging issues for the city. So I think that that's another thing to think about when we're talking about runoff. And I think one of the ways we really think about, and we were just talking about like safe routes to schools and all these things, is like, how do we create more green space, more space where water can go? And so when we're working on putting in a garden or a farm or parks, you know, how are we creating more space for water to actually be absorbed in actual soil and not just hit concrete and have that runoff? So, and rain gardens can be great buffers to asphalt parking lot and green space too.
So I'd like to back up, because when I first heard the term rain garden, I envisioned this lush vegetated space and rain coming down from some imaginary cloud, right? A rain garden is not quite that, although it is beautiful and it is natural.
Yeah, and there are lots of different ways to do them as well, and a lot of them are, you know, where you're picking plants that are good filtration systems. But yeah, sometimes they're, you know, when there's no rain, like last year when we had a huge drought, they need to be able to survive those. It's not like a tropical space. And then also we've been talking a lot about how do we purify water through systems and then use them for irrigation. And I know that's something that we've talked about too, is like, how are we using gutter systems and actually capturing water to use them to irrigate instead of putting in new irrigation systems and using new water. So doing some of that rainwater recycling is another thing too to talk about.
So for me, the rainwater gets recycled. It gets contained, let's say, at the edge of a surface like a parking lot in a depressed area where it can flow by gravity, very natural, and enter through these plant materials that you talk about, Lydia, and filter through those plant materials down into the subsoils and get into the water system through that natural filtration membrane, as opposed to going into a culvert, going down a manhole, going down a culvert pipe, and having to go through treatment. So if you can take some of that load off of our treatment centers and process those pollutants out of the sheet flow more naturally, you really can reduce the cost and the infrastructure of treatment centers that can now work more easily.
So in other words, if the water coming out of the Merrimack is cleaner, we need to spend less money and time and effort cleaning it.
Absolutely.
And soil does that naturally.
Right.
It's like
we just have to plan for it. So that's the easy part, and that's what I am excited about. The council, the Sustainability Council, has the goal of just bringing stakeholders to the table to inform and manage, you know, determine best practices for moving into areas where we're thinking about it maybe a little bit earlier in our planning process and achieving natural results at less cost.
And I think, like, you know, we need to think about things that are on a, you know, larger system wide, so rain gardens and other ways to do that, but then also think about what people can do in their homes to help. So whether it's leaving green space, planting out perennials, having garden space, all of those things, or using their gutters to collect rainwater to water their lawns instead of maybe having to irrigate a bunch. There are all these different ways to help with this process that we're talking about. So it's not just, you know, put in a very elaborate rain garden. That is one piece, but we can all have little ways that we're also working on this project of keeping the Merrimack River cleaner and safer, and a resource that we're all benefiting from. So there are other ways for green infrastructure to be replicated in a smaller.
Well, and I like what you said about the collection point on the roof. You've got a roof system on this garden of yours, this 30 by 60 roof system. So now you're collecting, you know, 1,800 square feet of rainwater.
It's a lot of rainwater. In fact, we're going to catch it first and use that to irrigate.
Exactly.
And then all the excess overflows going into the rain garden. That's the design we're working with right now. And actually, I mean, one of the interesting things, and you know this, but to do this on your own roof, roofs are made with like lots of growth inhibitors and retardants that basically make moss not grow on your roof. So you actually have to be really careful about what you're irrigating with, or you need a filtration system for your rainwater catchment system.
And that reminds me, if I could, the buildings in Lowell downtown are predominantly flat roofed. And there's a lot of opportunities for roof gardens. Excuse me. You can collect that water, filter it, and use it for irrigation if you have a roof garden, and use it in a way that takes advantage where before we just kind of wasted it and made it more of a burden for our our stormwater infrastructure
Right.
system.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, in addition to rain gardens, which kind of collect flow from, as funnels, if you would, so you want to site them in places where, runoff was kind of flowing towards a central point, everyone can participate in this simply by opening up their property to more soil, basically.
Right. Yeah, and one thing, so we put a lot of gardens in on asphalt. So parking lots or things that have been paved, and even if you build a raised bed on a garden, that is, you're catching some of that rainwater before it's running out into our sewer system. So there are lots of ways to do that, and I do think it's challenging because in the urban setting you have this constant tension between like parking and cars and safe sidewalks and green space, and it's actually, I think, what's been really wonderful in our experience is that they really can coexist quite well, and people are very resourceful in this community, and any inch of green space we often see people planting and finding a use for it.
Absolutely. Now, I know that some cities have some people in some cities have adopted depaving campaigns, and I don't know if that's something that is sort of hit the streets, as it were, here in Lowell, or
we've talked about it, and we have a committee at the Sustainability Council from last year on stormwater management, and we were exploring ways of advancing our policy towards more pervious paving in installations. Right now, the Novus Engineering building, for example, a LEED green renovation over here on Middlesex Street, has a pervious paving parking lot, and that allows the water to filter down through the paving instead of running off of it.
Right.
And the more examples of that that are coming down the road, I think we're going to hear more of solutions like that for sure.
Great.
We're actually looking right now at a project where we would be using a geogrid, which is even more pervious. It's actually something like 90-something% pervious. So it's really just a grid that you place on a substrate, either a stone bed or a grassed soil surface that allows a very large percentage of the water to perk right through your surface into your substrate below.
So that sounds terrific. Pervious means the opposite of impermeable. In other words,
or impervious,
it flows right through it.
Right.
Yeah, which is important. And we're discovering more and more, and including in our planning process, more and more these days, pervious pavement as opposed to just blanket asphalt. Now, I want to just go back to rain gardens, which are sort of a subset of another term that I should probably be banned from using, bioremediation, which is about as exciting as infrastructure. But there are various kinds of rain garden type projects. But let's tell the viewers what a rain garden looks like, even though we can't create one with this
We
table.
should have had pictures of it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We may be able to come up with some, but what do you plant in one, and is it because I'm exactly with Jay. When I've heard the term rain garden, I actually thought, wow, that's great, a new place to take a shower outside with flowers.
Well, so in our example, the project that we're working on right now, we have a 20-foot wide or 24-foot wide paved surface that is impervious, and it slopes at 2%, so about 4 inches across its surface to a lower area that is going to be planted with materials and have a certain composition of stone material below, and will act as a rain garden filter. And that strip is about 5 or 8 feet wide, and it will travel the length of the road surface. So in this project's case, several hundred feet, and it will allow us to use the natural system instead of having to go to manholes or to catch basins and so forth.
Because if you take a cut, basically, if you were looking at a rain garden, you could like slice it. It would almost look like layers of a cake, where you'd have different stones and different materials that are actually going to allow for drainage. But then you're also counting on the root system of all these plants that are, and that's another like figuring out the right plant species for how much you're trying to process in those rain gardens and filter is another component as well. So
and their ability to withstand and hold up to being inundated with
water, and then sometimes not having any water.
Stuff, right.
And then other things too. So I mean, so you're looking at layers of different materials as well. So
Right. And also, you're the plant expert, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I'm not. Only
But-
if you can eat the plants am I the expert.
Well, you've run a farm, I
Yeah,
understand,
yeah,
for
yeah,
a number of
yeah.
years, not even before Mill City Grows.
Yeah.
What sort of plants? I mean, not specific plants, but what sort of plants might thrive in a rain garden? Well, what are we looking at?
Right. So we actually been talking about whether or not we can do some edibles, and part of it is actually trying to figure out, like, do you have certain advanced parts of the garden where it's perennials, like maybe it's raspberries or blueberries or some kind of bushes that are perennials, and then you're kind of working your way down to the real rain garden area that might get a little bit more inundated with water and is doing more filtration. So we've talked about that. I mean, we actually, most of the species that we're talking about in the rain garden are not edibles. So it's definitely not my expertise area. Again, if you can eat it, I know about it, but if you can't,
Well,
I'm not
it
as
sounds
good.
like a rain garden
Yeah.
is not a farm
yeah,
location.
it's not.
Right?
No, absolutely. And we're really thinking about it with UMass Lowell. The big thing is we're right by the river. You know, the goal of the greenhouse and the urban agriculture space is to be very sustainable. And so what we're thinking is, one, as much recycling of water we can do as possible. It's nice, it's polycarbonate, so there isn't going to have to be a lot of purification or filtration of the water. But the rain garden is just going to get overflow. So it's often like lots of grassy bushes that have really intensive root systems. Will work around native plants, clearly, because they're going to be the most well adapted to this area. But do you have, I don't have like a plant list
No,
off the top
I'm
of my
afraid
head.
I'm not a plant
I'm not
expert.
a plant expert on those kinds of things. I'd have to get Gallagher here.
Gallagher,
she would know.
Gallagher
Yeah.
right now, I think, is at a reunion of the Conway School where my colleague Alex Croft
cool.
is. So
That's
they're
great.
having that beer they
yeah,
promised each other.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking of blue flag iris, but
Yeah.
all I know about that is I don't think it's edible.
No. So yeah,
The
count
last
me
time
out.
I tried to
yeah.
eat it, I was in big trouble. But the proposal, or as I understand it, the proposal at the UMass facility, which sits directly above the river, sort of there's a very sharp slope,
Right.
would be to build essentially a vegetated swale. Instead of a rain garden that's round like a pond, it would be linear, and it would basically
It's going to work with the slope of and it's going to work to, as things go down. And then one interesting thing being so close to the river is that we're also going to be creating all a permanent bed system. And permanent beds for agriculture are basically, we still move the soil within the bed, but the pathways will have a living mulch, basically. So it'll be a clover or some kind of
nice.
so they're living pathways, and that way we're not having runoff, we're not constantly tilling, and that's one of the big components of industrial agriculture that is difficult, is that you're creating a lot of bare soil, and with that comes you have it's easier for things to run off, like with when it rains, but also you can lose topsoil. So our goal on this site is really to maintain the integrity of the soil structure with permanent bed systems and these rain gardens as a way to really make sure that the structure of the soil is staying put.
Right, and we're doing this in connection with UMass. So do you see this as a?
Sorry.
Good. You still have that microphone
I
on there,
do,
Lydia?
I
Good,
do, I think
good.
so.
Yeah, okay, let's keep talking. With UMass, so this is also an educational and training facility, as well as a facility that will involve people from the community.
Yeah, so it's starting as a space where we're going to be growing a lot of food, and so the goal is to have a lot of agricultural production, and that's kind of the way all of our sites, we want to make sure we're doing production urban agriculture, but the amazing thing about our partnership with the university is there are so many students, engineers, also folks that are doing alternative energy, agriculture. There are a lot of people developing new plastics, which we use a lot of plastics in agriculture for irrigation, for greenhouse structures. So really working with professors and students to do projects to make urban agriculture more sustainable, but also to make it more efficient and effective. Right now, urban centers have very limited space for agriculture, so how are we getting the most production out of small spaces? How are we growing year-round, growing indoors? Those are some of the things that we're trying to work on with the university, and also, we are partnering with the sustainability department, so making sure that we're also learning how to make year-round greenhouse production very sustainable as well. A lot of growers are using oil or gas to heat their greenhouses, so how do we use alternative energies?
Like solar.
solar, water. There's a lot of really interesting work being done where we're heating the soil rather than heating the air, and what's
Interesting.
And it's really thinking about
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You talked about plastics,
Yeah.
and I'm curious from a sustainability standpoint,
Yeah.
from a climate change standpoint, we're hoping to see us move away from fossil fuel-based plastics, and I imagine the university probably has some thinking towards how do you create plastic without petroleum. Are you aware
I'm
of
not
any
sure
of
yet.
that?
I mean, this is like, we're just at the tip, and I think that what we're excited to do is find professors that are doing those innovations, because, you know, in agriculture, there a lot of farms, and especially larger farms, use black plastic to cover beds for weed pressure, also to heat up soil faster, and now they're making biodegradable plastics. But how are we turning also our irrigation systems into plastics that are biodegradable and not fossil fuel?
I know we've used those at the Folk Festival. We've got biodegradable silverware, which is fantastic.
And that compost actually comes back really beautiful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And
well, this gives new meaning to that famous line from The Graduate. Maybe we should have a showing of it. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to sort of end with a question. If our viewers or anyone is interested in seeing a rain garden in action, are there examples in Lowell or nearby that you know about?
We can point you out to some. I don't have any addresses off the top of my head, and I'd want to check with the, but I'd be very happy to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And in terms of that, I did want to make a shout out to this for the Sustainability Council and for Mill City Grows. If folks are interested in learning more about how they can get involved with some of our sustainability efforts, they can look us up on Facebook. I know that Mill City Grows has a Facebook page, as does the Sustainability Council. We're also on the city website. So if you just Google Lowell Sustainability Council, you'll find us, and you can get information about our meetings and how to get involved. And we're having a table at the Folk Festival. We're planning our summit, and I'm excited about our next year's awards program that we're putting together. Mill City Grows was our first individual recipient of that award, and we're looking forward to a really robust competition this year.
Great. Well, that's really terrific. And I will add that Merrimack River Watershed Council is also, of course, interested in green infrastructure, that boring word, and rain gardens. We actually have some grant support to do some education around that. So we're hoping to work with you and all work together on this important project. It's designed to give our cities a far more aesthetic beauty, and also clean up the river and connect to agriculture. So Lydia Sisson, who is co-director of Mill City Grows, and Jay Mason, who is chair of the Lowell Sustainability Council, thank you so much for being on this month's edition. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Issue at hand: clean water, green infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you on the river.
Yeah.